Здравствуйте. Так,
Hello.
объясните, как кликером пользоваться и где кликер?
Can you please explain how to use the clicker?
Вот оно, да? Да. Всем привет, меня зовут Антон Белоусов. Я расскажу про хайповую тему, как сказали, про ИИ-агенты, как мы их применяем для...
I will be talking about the hyped-up subject of AI agents and how we use them for the purposes of
Про факапы, которые у нас были, извините за это слово.
cyberintelligence, let's call it like this.
По...
So I will be sharing with you both our best practices and our fuck-ups.
Специалист по всему. Дело в том, что...
Now, the presentation says that I'm an expert in everything. I have a startup where I'm both the CEO and the CTO, and I also wash the floors, which means I have to be an expert in everything. I've been in development for about 18 years. I stopped counting, really. I've been doing AI since 2022. It says it all, really. This is the conference plan.
Сделать хардкорное выступление, прям совсем...
Initially, I wanted to give you a hardcore presentation and show the code and everything, but then I realized that so many people are interested in that and not everybody knows a lot about it, so we'll start with an introduction of why you would want to use AI agents, the architectures and the frameworks, and the models that we tried, and afterwards we'll look at the problems, the issues, and the best practices.
Так, почему же все-таки агенты? Для чего их используют? Почему это...
So why agents? Why would we use agents? Why are they hyped up? Well, because they are fashionable, aren't they?
Нет, давайте начнем так. Агент, это что это такое? Вот у нас есть LLM.
What is an agent?
Человек или какая-то...
We have an LLM system. So somebody sends a request, and some functions are called.
Собственно, вообще непонятно.
And that sounds like something simple. Why the hype, right?
Кликер перестал работать. Все. Агенты могут справляться со сложными задачами, неструктурированными.
So agents can do, some complex and sometimes even unstructured tasks. And I think you all know that, right?
Заранее не определяете алгоритм, потому как агент по этим шагам идет.
So you don't even need to tell the agent what the right sequence is. The agent can process big data, the agent can have agency, meaning they can be autonomous. You send it information, you don't need to monitor each and every step. Agents can process a lot of data. For example, we use them to process threats and indicators.
В обработке этих сложных данных не нужно вовлечение человека. Агент там сам разбирается, как...
In most steps, human involvement is not required.
Агент, как мы тут еще раз вернемся назад, у нас есть среда, агент может действовать.
So we have our environment, and agents can operate in a changing environment. We don't need to redesign the agent every time the environment changes, when some input data change, for example.
Поменялись модели, например, поменялась реакция.
When the model changes, or when the response or the reaction of the environment changes, or the responses coming from the tools that we invoke change.
Кликер, все. Недостатки агентов. Почему агенты
Disadvantages of agents.
удобными в ваших решениях?
Why agents can be not too good for you. One is latency.
Я не все выступление, к сожалению, слышал.
Unfortunately, I haven't heard the full presentation before me. I realized that, the guys analyze some packets.
Хорошо действует.
Well, in an environment like this, agents will not be very good because they do spend a lot of time analyzing data.
Агентов приходится доверять, то есть вы не можете, как сказать, вам придется доверить тому, что агент решил, потому что если вы будете
You end up trusting the agent, because if you control every step that the agent makes, you don't really need the agent. Like, if you are involved in validating the agent all the time, why would you need it?
С помощью агентов, то есть у нас агенты появились, агенты
Now, with agents,
надо контролировать, надо как-то фильтровать данные, которые...
there is a new security issue. We need to filter the data we send to the agents. There have been presentations already today focusing on data sanitization, and it's particularly important if you're using cloud LLMs. And you know what?
потеряют, но это
With
шутка.
agents like this, lots of people may lose their jobs. But okay, that's a joke. Now let's talk about when to use agents and when not.
Достаточно большой поток разнородных входящих данных.
You know, when you have a diverse flow of input data, meaning, the input data is diverse.
Программу каждый раз, когда данные немножко варьируются. Алгоритм обработки.
So if you use agents, you don't need to change your code. The processing algorithm can change somewhat, so you will be using the same tools, and the sequence of processing can differ. So this is when you would want to use agents.
То есть вы даже
What's a must is that you have a finite space of end state, so to speak. You need to be aware of what kind of states are possible in your system. You need to be aware of the processing algorithm, because if you don't understand what kind of processing needs to happen, you won't understand how agents work. Now, you don't want to do that if you are developing something for a specific task. And I'm speaking from experience.
Забронировать отель, проанализировать данные и так далее, и так далее.
So,
Путь в никуда. Вы доведете себя.
an agent that can say, book a hotel and also analyze your data, and you don't want that. You'll go crazy with an agent like this.
Определенный тип инцидентов или там.
So you're analyzing a very particular type of incidents, a particular data format. So the more narrow the space is for the agent, the higher the accuracy will be.
Агенты здесь будут круто работать. Многие примеры агентов, которые вы наверняка видели там на LangGraph, LangChain.
Now, you must have seen lots of agents from LangGraph and others. They say, we've got a hotel booking agent, a flight booking agent, and so on.
Зачем эти агенты там нужны?
Why would you need an agent for that? That's weird. Like, when you want scalability, you may need agents.
Данные однотипные, то есть, не знаю, вот у вас какая-то простая форма приходит постоянно, там тот же букинг отелей или полетов.
Now, take, for example, hotel or flight booking. It's a simple, small set of fields and simple ones. You don't need an agent for that.
Если вы не можете определить пространство,
Finally, if you cannot identify the space of states,
то тоже агенты будут не очень подходящими.
you won't benefit from agents.
Где агенты применяются, это копилот.
In cybersecurity,
решения
you may want to use them as analyst co-pilots.
российских вендоров сейчас есть автоматизация.
Some leading Russian vendors now have got fully automated SOCs. There have been studies which you probably cannot read here. There have been studies into fully automated SOCs running agents. Seems to be functional. It's an interesting study, if you ask me. Now, phishing vulnerability addressing. Indeed, we have everything that we need here, because we do have this flow of data. The data is quite diverse, scaling. There is no clear-cut algorithm for identifying what phishing is and what isn't. For red teaming purposes, I think even positive technologists have got it. I'm sorry, I don't remember what PT calls their agentic red teaming solution.
Мы сканируем источники разноплановые.
So we will be scanning various sources on the dark net.
Опять же, большой поток данных, но нет четкой спецификации того, как именно эти данные выглядят.
And, you do have lots of data there, and you don't really have clear specifications. We also use it for other cyberintelligence purposes, such as processing IOCs. So we can use LLMs and small prompts to process them on the fly. We can also use them to prioritize incidents. And we recently started using them to analyze public opinion.
По анализу рисков организаций.
It's actually part of a bigger project around analyzing organization risks. There was a recent study about smart Chinese researchers applying it for sentiment analysis, and it seems to be working. I'll have a list of links in the end of my presentation. Now, let's quickly cover the typical infrastructure.
Security, хоть какое-то, чтобы было. На вход у нас поступает какой-то инцидент, допустим.
So we're getting an incident here. It can be an IP or something.
Приходим в LLM-ку, LLM-ку
Then we come to the LLM.
вызывать какие-нибудь тулзы для анализа.
We ask the LLM if it is going to invoke any tools to analyze the IP or not.
Даем ей инструменты, Nmap, web request, скриншот.
Then we give it the screenshot, Nmap, web request. We tell it, well, you got the tools, make do with it. Then it can, for example, check if it's got open ports and will do a web request. Will possibly analyze the screenshots and see if it looks like a phishing email or not. And then once it believes it's ready with the result,
выходит. Это самый базовый компонент какого-то агента.
It will tell us what its verdict is. That's the fundamental, that's the basic structure, but everything else is built on that. So I took this picture from LangChain. So this is multi-agentic supervisor arrangement where you have a supervisor agent giving tasks to others. I don't like hotels and flight agents, but I didn't have the time to redraw it. So, as a human, you give tasks to the supervisor agent, and the supervisor agent gives tasks to others. It can have access to RAG and search across TTP and databases, but I think the idea is clear. So, agents swarm, where they chat with each other, they invoke each other. And in the end, people think that somehow magically it is going to provide a good solution. I'll share my experience with those swarms a bit later, but first I got to tell you about the frameworks. And I'll also explain if we had issues.
Это низкоуровневая такая штука, не такой хайповый, как MCP.
So we use LangGraph.
Дает возможность декларативно описать граф состояний. Вы примерно представляете, по какому графу у вас должна быть обработка данных. Позволяет делать циклы ветвлений.
So this way you can do cycles, you can do branching, and the LLM itself maintains or makes sure it's dynamic. So you can effectively tell, well, we've got this data, do something about it. So each element here is a separate agent or robot, as I've drawn here. So this way, you can actually include a human in the processing cycle. You can stop the graph execution at any time and ask for human feedback. What's good about it is that, they can show state because, when you work with agents, they sometimes get themselves in a corner. And they can be even worse than humans in this respect. So you need to control their state. You need to trace it all the time. Now the state is recorded, meaning you can roll it back. And I recommend that you do it. You start with LangGraph. If you don't know much about agents, you will learn how it works. And as regards swarms, and OpenAI swarm and agents API, they share the same logic as LangGraph. LangGraph is actually great for creation of customized tools, so if you're a big fan of having full control over what you do, consider LangGraph.
Недавно появившаяся штука LangGraph Swarm, мы ее...
So LangGraph Swarm, a recent innovation, something we have already tried. It's been out for about 3 months. So it's a high-level superstructure on top of LangGraph. So if you are lazy, you can assign agents and put them in a swarm. You can actually create a swarm on LangGraph as it is, but you'll have to connect them manually. But here, you can actually do it in a very simple way by saying, well, you're an agent, there are other agents around you, go and find a solution. It's also highly customizable, just like LangGraph. There is a lot of syntactic sugar here. I don't really think it comes with too many bonuses, though. Though it does minimize the number of words you have to type in. What's great is that agents share their common state, but you can have the same with LangGraph as such. You can customize the agents so that they have have separate states. And again,
Все работают над
I think it's useful to have the common state when you have agents working on the same task. They have access to the shared pool of messages. They see what each agent has been doing, and they usually work sequentially. If you launch them asynchronously,
поэтому
it will
агенты зачастую
devolve into schizophrenia very quickly. It makes a lot of sense to invoke agents sequentially. So you can use Swarm for a fast start.
контроль не нужен.
You'll minimize your typing time. If you don't need full control over the execution of your graph, you may want to try Swarm. We've just tried it when it's using it in production. MCP is very, very fashionable now. It gives you high-level access to agents
Очень крутая вещь.
and diverse tools.
В продакшн
A great thing. So far, we've not implemented it fully in production.
MCP.
Currently, we're using a combination of LangGraph and MCP. MCP is effectively a universal bus for connecting, diverse agents.
Пишите сами, какой агент кого вызывает, какие
So you actually indicate here, what agents are doing what and what's being sent. Well, with MCP, it's different. You've got a unified protocol. You can connect to other agents over the net with other tools. That gives you, a level of abstraction,
не хватало. Я думаю, подробно
something we've all wanted to have with agents.
MCP попробовали, или, по крайней мере, не
I
знаю.
guess you've all tried MCP,
Я вот на курсор уже полностью перешел.
or you must have at least coded on Cursor. I've switched to Cursor completely. It's humiliating to do the coding manually.
Уже интегрируется с MCP.
And Cursor is already integrating MCP.
Агентов в MCP там есть специальный
We are publishing our agents in MCP. MCP has got its own repository for that.
когда нужна интероперабельность, она постоянно.
It's great to use it when you need interoperability, and you do need interoperability most of the time.
Поскольку немножко как-то с кибербезом работаем.
Well, since we do a thing or two about cybersecurity, we need to integrate lots and lots of tools. So MCP is a kind of a must.
Используем ее в комбинации с LangGraph, то есть
Like I said, we're using it in combination with LangGraph. I'm sorry, let me go back a bit.
у агентов он пишется
So the basic flow of agents is developed on LangGraph. So we have the basic architecture, lots of agents connected together, and MCP is used for connecting to external agents and other tools. Like switching completely to MCP is a bit too audacious a move, because the level of abstraction there is pretty high. Now, there are lots and lots of other frameworks out there. Take, for example, Pydantica AI, OpenAI Agents SDK, and so on. Crew AI, for example, and AutoGen, they all have their pros and cons. We chose
дает высокий уровень контроля. Кстати, Pydantica AI то
LangGraph. By the way, Pydantic AI is a lot of fun.
будем, потому что эти технологии каждую неделю появляются.
I would seriously consider it, but redesigning all our code to fit it feels like a bit too much of an effort. I would not recommend the other three. Like, if you don't want to control all the operations of your agent, you probably don't want that. But playing with this stuff is interesting, I think. I'm sorry, I hope I have not stepped anybody's toes here.
Я сгенерил по LangGraph
This is an example I have generated with LangGraph.
создание угроз на основе индикатора.
So it shows how we can actually do threat identification and response.
Почему-то не генерит, я не разобрал.
I'm sorry, for some reason LangGraph doesn't, or at least I haven't learned how to generate flowcharts that are horizontal LangGraph.
Существующей угрозе, вот здесь вот в LLM-ку приходит запрос, у нее есть доступ
So there is a request coming to LLM, it has access to existing images,
к соединению с тулзами.
it looks for threats using its own kind of information.
Обязательный шаг в этих агентах
By the way, a mandatory step when using such agents
потому что обязательно нужна валидация каждого шага.
is such that you need to validate every step. So you need to have a validator agent.
Точность
This way,
работает всей
you
системы.
significantly increase the accuracy level of the whole system.
Здесь в Select Existing
Like, even if you do your prompting properly,
равно периодически
say, select existing threat,
свистеть фляга, и мы будем здесь это
if you don't have validation built into your flow, workflow,
предыдущий результат, и
it will give you some pretty crazy results from time to time.
мы либо
So that's a great and simple way of improving accuracy. So for an incoming indicator, we either select a pre-existing threat or we create a new one. And again, this can be done with an agent. So then you validate, you merge, you get the result. All this works asynchronously with lots and lots of, they're called greenlets or whatever in Python. They're not called threads. So when you get a thread, a stream of indicators coming in, they're all deparallelized. So while one greenlet is blocked for processing one indicator, in parallel we'll summon another thread of the LLM to take care of the other. I'll tell you quickly about the models. And then we'll talk about problems and best practices. It's a bit too early to talk about Yandex. Obviously, it all runs great on OpenAI and Claude. What if there is a requirement not to use foreign LLMs? Modern Russian models are catching up slowly, but they're not there yet. So we tried Yandex GPT-5 Pro, the one that got recently released. I think it's in beta. I won't tell you how horrible the previous versions were. Now, this one is okay. All right, tool calling only became available in GPT-5. So I think you know why we would need tool calling in agents, because we invoke tools with agents. We need to interact with the outside world. And GPT-5, if I remember correctly, is just been developed. So the API itself is a bit raw at the moment. It sometimes generates errors 500, and the service doesn't believe us. You know what? So we tried to develop a production-grade solution off the back of the system, and it's not good enough. I mean, it's good for experimentation, but I think for production-ready systems, we'll need to wait a couple of months. So we had a production version of an agent. We could not connect to Yandex endpoint over HTTPS for an hour, and we couldn't really understand why.
Решение приемлемо, но с обработкой ошибок и ретрай и бэков. То есть, если вы делаете какой-то запрос в LLM-ку, вы должны знать, что...
So, if you're sending a request to the LLM, you gotta know that, it may take 30 seconds to respond, or the connection may be broken. So you need to introduce some error handling, and the timeout should, grow over time and so on.
Если вы будете рейзить ошибку просто, то ваш агент будет не работать.
If you keep raising an error, this agent will not be functional.
Один раз все сработает в стрим.
You'll stay at the level of, long chain demos with a hotel booking. You don't want that in your production system. We tried Sber GigaChat 2. Initially, we thought there were fewer problems there, until they released Max. We also had 500 errors. There were also constraints in terms of parallelization.
Контекстное окно у него побольше, чем у Яндекса, по-моему.
The context window in Giga is bigger than for Yandex, which is good. Because, you can send a single beefy request. So recommendations are the same. Like it can be functional. It is just, it's a bit less stable than OpenAI, but it's workable.
Локальные модели контроля больше, мы зафайн-тюним.
So with local models, you have better control. We've fine-tuned QN 2.57b. We have not fine-tuned QN3 yet. QN is not great with Russian, but it has high predictability. And you have a pretty high degree of control over it. So if your HTTPS is down, for example, you can at least check the logs rather than, send messages to the service desk and hear from them that everything is fine. Let's talk about the issues. What have we discovered? Maybe you have gone through these issues already, then my congratulations. Speed. Now imagine that you've developed an awesome agent.
Как я говорил, некоторые LLM-ки начинают отвечать по полгода.
And then you see that some LLMs take 6 months to respond. So this one is tracing
Есть такая штука для observability.
with the Rise Phoenix, an observability solution, 182 seconds
Набор индикаторов какой-то.
was the processing time
В принципе, казалось бы,
for some indicators by the agent. Not too much, you'll say, right? But when you have an increasing volume of data,
как это обрабатывать
it becomes an issue.
вовремя, потому что
So you'll need to decide how to deal with it in production.
круто поаплодировали, денег выделили, или там деньги получили от клиента, а как в проде работать, ну, придется разбираться. Инструменты API постоянно тайм-аутятся, то есть мы работаем.
Tools and APIs go through timeouts all the time. So imagine it's cybersecurity, right? So you want to scan ports or whatever, or check pings.
Сами можете придумать, какие инструменты там могут
I
использовать.
think you can easily imagine what kind of tools can be used for that. Now imagine that all this stuff keeps breaking down.
Нужно делать обработку ошибок.
So you got to do error handling.
Агент написали, и он у вас
For sure, you cannot really count on your agent to be working all the time. It won't.
плюс. Мы столкнулись с проблемой того, что вы пишете агент по классической схеме.
We also have this issue that,
Поднимите руку, пожалуйста.
now raise your hands if you know how to program.
Привет. Вот вы
Oh, hello,
в
brothers.
базе данных
So you connect to database.
какие-то прочитали, заслали в агент.
So some data has been read there, you send it to the agent, you expect an answer,
Когда вы
and then you expect to submit data back to the database, and the connection is still up. Now you're processing lots of data, all this connects
так не пойдет.
are maintained, and the database will eventually tell you, now this is not going to work. I'm not going to maintain hundreds of connections.
Встроенные решения, фреймворки, которые сейчас есть, ланграфы.
So land graphs and other solutions currently available are not going to help. You'll have to develop a solution for that on your own.
Контроль времени выполнения обязательно нужен. Тайм-аут.
Execution time control is a
Не
must.
знаю, 30 секунд, 60 секунд, час.
You can set 30 seconds, 60 seconds, like 1 hour timeouts, because it can happen that the agent starts contemplating its navel or waiting for a cloud LM response. And then, you will be pretty surprised when you discover that your agent has been working for several days, and certainly this is not what you expected.
Ограничивающие факторы.
You gotta introduce constraints in your prompts.
Те
You gotta analyze the prompts you're using for your agents all the time.
что у вас агент возвращает, проводить кучу тестов, потому что иногда бывает то, что даже,
And see what they return.
я не знаю, у вас отвалидированный промпт, вы просите, возвращай мне,
So you can have a validated prompt, and you can tell it only return true or false, and still, in 1 out of 1,000 cases, it will return you, a long essay instead of true or false.
у топовых моделей, что они начинают...
Even the leading models sometimes do that.
Слышали, наверное.
But everybody knows about hallucinations, don't you?
То есть если вы
Observability is a must.
просто запустили, и что он там делает,
If you've developed an agent and you have no clue what it's doing down there,
дебаги там в логах и так далее, нужны вот подобные решения.
you'll spend your whole life debugging.
Какие
So you need solutions like a Rise Phoenix
LLM, сколько
to see which chains have been triggered, how many tokens were spent, and so on.
из-за того, что агент
Otherwise, there will be surprises
или то, что
because, the agent will respond in an unexpected way, or maybe a prompt generator comes up with something crazy. You also need to release resources before you launch an agent, because if you're using some classic assets like the network or the database, all this stuff needs to be read once and then it has to be
не
released.
секрет, что токены едят бюджет. Мы несколько раз
You certainly know that tokens can easily eat into your budget.
для клиента мы как-то
We've seen that. We once spent 70,000 rubles for a single report for a client, and that was a pretty short report, actually, simply because we did not introduce the guardrails. That was fun, but not too much fun.
с сохранением состояния, то есть если
There are
вы
mistakes sometimes related to
агент должен сохранить промежуточное состояние,
states. Like if you do not tell your agents to kind of save its temporary state,
и все
because, it can go down with an exception. This means that all interim results have been lost. Tokens have been spent money has been debited and you still have nothing. We lost quite a lot of money this way. So LangGraph enables you to save the state of your agents. Make sure you use this function.
Рост контекстного окна сейчас многие
Increase in context window. Lots of LLMs now operate with large context windows like 128K, 1 million. Nobody has 1 billion window yet, but that's a matter of time, I guess. The problem is that the data we serve or that we feed there is growing as well. So in multimodal LLMs, we'll often be comparing screenshots. So this page looks like a phishing page. This one looks like a real one. Tell us if there is any difference. So you can easily end up having prompts that have, size in megabytes. And even modern models, some of them will not be good for them. So keep track of that. In LangGraph Swarm, you can indicate the max number of tokens available. You can have it in other systems as well. So make sure you use it, particularly if you're planning to have a production level system, if you don't want bad surprises. Because in production, you can easily exceed the limit of the context window, and that means that, you will waste money when the whole system breaks down.
С бесконечными циклами мы тоже сталкивались.
Endless cycles.
На самом старте вы можете...
We had this experience at the very beginning. Like, imagine that you develop an agent, and it's particularly common with the agent swarms. So imagine that you have a multitude of agents talking to each other, so it can easily happen that, they, invoke each other sequentially. And I'm showing here, in fact, a very simple combination, but you can have like 10 different agents tagging each other all the time. So good frameworks have tools for controlling this, like the number of recursive calls. Please remember that it's all going to come crashing with an exception. If it's a production system, it means we're losing money and no work is being done. So you need validations. So imagine that you simply introduce a recursion limit of 3 here. This means that, okay, the whole task will kind of go down because of an exception when it hits the recursion number 3. So make sure you use a prompt generator which has a kind of limits for that. And ideally, you want to be looking back at the history so that the system knows when agents previously defaulted. If you're using cursor, I know from personal experience that, when you tell your agent, like, come up with a Python script for me, it tells you, yeah, sure, I'll do that. So what they do now is importing a list with capital L from typing, and it tells you, well, you don't need to do that. There is no need to write a list with a capital L, and it tells me yes, and it continues, doing that. So this is so characteristic of LLMs. They will often ignore, in a pretty dumb way, your instructions. Maybe I suck at prompting, I don't know, but I keep having this issue.
Когда у нас есть обработка кучи данных, как мы вначале говорили, то, что агенты целесообразны.
This must be race condition, right? So, I've already mentioned that agents make a lot of sense when you need to process a lot of data.
Наверное, это не очень.
I mean, it's still pretty weird to use it for hotel booking, right? So asyncs, awaits, synchronizations, they're all very well, but if you've been exposed to that, you must have noticed that, when you're working with the network, you can easily DOS somebody accidentally or run into a limitation on API calls. So the API that we have has an inbuilt limitation on number of parallel calls. You have the same limitation even in Nmap. And it's a good idea to control for that. In a long chain, there is a setting for max concurrency. So you need semaphores. If you're developing a production solution, there is no going without it.
Каждая работала, они
So this one says, they've been working for 30 seconds, but please note we're all running concurrently
позволяют экономить
for
время.
less than 30 seconds. This is great. This helps you save time, but it does create some architectural challenges.
Стабильность, которая
Stability.
в программировании вообще, наверное, отсутствует, если
Stability
вы простые вещи пишете. Все
is something unattainable in software development unless you're doing something very simplistic.
в Line-графе обязательно retry policy надо использовать, хотя бы стандарт.
So the line graph here says you gotta make sure you're using your retry policy.
Одну и ту же ноду.
Something that will, start the same node, for example.
Можно тихонечко краем глаза посмотреть, то, что у нас есть агент, он вызывает какие-то тулзы.
So you see we have an agent that summons some tools, and we have a retry policy for that. So if everything goes down, we...
Обновляется среда, постоянно обновляются библиотеки.
So if something goes down, we recreate it, so to speak.
Настолько, как сказать, земля уходит из-под ног, то что постоянно нужен контроль за этим, за всем. Ну и плюс...
So lots of things are mutable. We need to have proper control. This is like the fourth time I'm saying that, but I do believe that you need observability.
Ну и логика,
Otherwise,
много логов.
you will be swarmed by surprises. And you gotta have logs, and you gotta consult your logs.
Потому что
What kind of parameters there? What were the results?
пишут что-нибудь гениальное.
Even senior software developers,
Буду
sometimes write the code that will be very difficult to sort of observe.
На нашей стране все нормально. Так.
And then you end up telling your clients, yeah, we are sorry about the failure. We'll need to test it on our side to see what the reason could be.
Как я уже говорил, то, что
Last but not least, security.
создают,
I've already mentioned that agents introduce new security issues.
если локально не
It's awesome if you can use a local model.
нужно очищать какие-то.
If you're not using local model, you gotta sanitize the data. And there are some great tools for that. I'm not going to advertise them off this stage though, but I know they do exist. Some of them are even Russian.
Нужно обязательно моделировать угрозы для своих агентских систем.
You absolutely need to model threats for your agentic systems.
Злой
These things that I've covered, they work very well.
проблема у нас добавится вот к этим стабильностям, параллелизмам. Это будет еще все интереснее и чудесней. Лучшие практики на основе проблем, которые я сейчас описал,
Now, the best practices on the basis of what I've described.
будет срабатывать. Нужно использовать только, вернее, скорее всего, нужно писать только специализированные агенты. Если у вас какой-то общий агент, идея какого-то общего агента, лучше отложить ее в сторону до того, как...
So if you have a specialized agent, use a specialized agent. Before AGI is developed, do not trust general-purpose agents.
Не тратьте свои деньги попусту.
Do
Нужно
not waste your money.
выходы из цикла, как я говорил,
Look for ways for escaping the cycle. I've already mentioned that it's pretty characteristic of agents
прерывать этот цикл, плюс...
to cycle on each other.
Это достаточно интересная тема для обсуждения, для изобретения, потому что текущие фреймворки предлагают только шлепнуться и...
The current frameworks, interestingly enough,
Нужно обязательно...
have just a single way of avoiding cycles, meaning failing.
Вы придумали какой-то...
There should be some other solution.
Умножаете
Now imagine you've come up with an arrangement of agents. You will need validators, meaning the total number of agents is double what you initially thought.
Где агенты друг с другом общаются, у нас не очень хорошо работает,
So,
потому что результаты он генерит хуже.
the
У меня была...
structure I told you previously about, where we have agents talking to each other, it's not really a good one.
Мы рой агентов как раз используем...
So we are using a swarm of agents for OSINT purposes. When, for example, we need to find information on a particular person. A swarm of agents can generate lots of creative information. However, this will not be true. We are looking for information about an individual using open source intelligence. Like I've been using this to find information on myself. But there is an MMA fighter named Anton Belosov. You can see that I'm not Anton Belosov.
Кучу регалий мне навесил, я такой сижу, думаю...
That's Belosov.
Хотелось бы...
So it was fun to read that I am a formidable MMA fighter and a graduate of Harvard. The only problem is that both statements are incorrect.
Которые умеют фильтровать информацию, и у них есть валидаторы, они работают лучше. Рой агентов,
So agents that have validators work better.
в практиках или в
Swarms of agents
когда вам нужно
can be interesting,
какие-то романы
can
писать,
even
я не
be
знаю.
better
Следующий лучший практик.
when you're doing something creative. For example, when you need to write a
Что
novel.
вы запихиваете в контекст, потому что агенты со временем могут раздувать эту информацию.
Please remember that agents will tend to sort of balloon information.
Шарятся состояние между агентами.
I've mentioned that states can be shared between agents in LangGraph Swarm, and they can easily create lots and lots of messages. This obviously means issues for you, so you need to limit the number of cycles for recursion purposes.
Потому что и OpenAI иногда выключается внезапно.
And in fact, you know,
Параллелизм, если вы
you need to limit parallelism.
их через async await.
Like, if you are going to process a lot of data through async await,
Много данных вы не обработаете, там куча потоков.
introduce controls.
С кучей потоков это еще будет более интересно.
So the more threads you have, the bigger the issues will be.
Ну и
Logging is important.
ободряюще я написал, что помните, все может отвалиться. И
And philosophically, remember that everything can fail. Don't trust anybody. If you're getting some data today, this doesn't mean you will be getting it tomorrow.
7 минут осталось.
I think this is it. We have, what is it, like 7 minutes left.
Есть репозиторий, там сейчас дальше ссылка.
I have a repository.
Там я положил пример, ну, к сожалению, пока ленграфа, но у вас будет инициатива.
I have an example of LangGraph there.
Написать, потому что я планирую
But
остальные примеры,
You can
связанные с кибербезопасностью,
add me to your tabs because I am planning
сегодня спал, поэтому
to upload more examples there a bit later. Unfortunately, I've had very little time to sleep today,
исследование.
hence little information there. Right, I promised to give you a list to the MCP server repository. You must have heard about Smithery. So in Smithery, you can find lots and lots of MCP options.
Может, у вас свои уже какие-то агенты есть.
I guess you're using Cursor, maybe some other agents of your own.
Агентов я его попробовал.
I recently found an agent for agent creation. That's a great thing.
Господи, на Pydantic AI создавать свои
So it enables you to create your own agents on Pydantica AI,
продакшн, пока не
a powerful tool. So far, we've not used it in production, but I love it.
Пожалуйста, отсканируйте. Это мой Telegram, это канал,
Please scan the QR codes. On the left is my personal Telegram. In the center, my personal channel, not very active there. And GitHub, where I have at the moment just a single example, but I'm going to upload more. Thank you very much.
Спасибо большое за доклад.
Thank you very much for this presentation. Hello. May I ask questions? Absolutely.
Пометочку одну сделаю с фреймворками. Еще недавно вышел Google ADK. Очень крутая штука.
There is also Google ADK, right?
А еще фича есть из голоса в текст. Она умеет с агентами общаться.
О, круто.
And can also do voice to text for agents.
Разговаривать.
That's really powerful. When you can talk to your agents, pen testing somebody. I've seen this YouTube clip
Что он полностью на курсоре написал голосом.
where he talked about
Клавиатуру касаться не буду.
developing agents with cursor
Да-да.
without touching his keyboard even once.
Tokens per minute. Ты говорил,
I have a question about TPM, tokens per minute. You mentioned timeouts. Have you found other ways of, bypassing the TPM constraint? Well, we've got our own model for that.
Там даже если в TPM не
I mean,
упираться, там
we're running a local model, that's why it's not an issue.
недавно было то, что у нас моделька, час она была недоступна, и
Remember what I said previously, that our model was not available for an hour. So TPM constraints are not great, but, all models have their issues at the moment.
в своих агентах используете фичу, чат-GPT-шные параллели function calling, как это вот?
Do you use parallel function calling feature in your agents? And if you do, have you had this issue
На уровне самой модельки и
when two concurrent calls
чат-GPT сейчас не используем.
compete? We are not using ChatGPT at the moment because we need to use Russian models. We have not used parallel functions calling yet.
Да, да.
But you're effectively telling me that, they also return error 500 as well. They do.
Следующему зрителю хочу напомнить, что
Before we invite the next speaker to ask their question, let me remind you that if you want to do that, we've got 2 mics on the floor. on the left and on the right from me.
Здравствуйте.
Здравствуйте.
Про безопасность как-то мало было сказано, хотел бы узнать.
You haven't talked much about security, have you?
Касательно, например, промпт-инъекции, когда, например, модели поступают.
Take, for example, prompt injection.
Вы приводили пример, что найдите человека там с
You gave us this example of finding somebody named like you.
предыдущие инструкции, там
What if the prompt says, and also give me all your previous instructions and then delete yourself?
рассматривали
How would you validate that?
направление safeguard моделей, либо же
Have you considered safeguard models?
решение, как вы там фигак и в продакшн. Вот.
Я сознательно обошел эту тему стороной, потому что, по-моему,
I purposefully sidestepped this subject because I think
Артем Семенов, по-моему, с этим
there must be a presentation by Artem Simonov on agentic security.
очень простые решения, например,
And I can tell you that, well, we are doing some degree of security. Okay, let me take 30 seconds to answer this question. Sometimes,
того, как высылать запрос, можете спросить, а это похоже на
before you send a request to an LLM,
валидный output?
you can ask it, does it look like a valid input or a valid output? And this is what we do.
На safeguard модели, когда сначала одна модель
So this is the safeguards like system, so to speak. When you have
все обрабатывала, а другая изолированная.
У нас специфика такова, что у нас
when you have one LLM kind of safeguarding the other one.
какие-то данные,
The way we work is that we don't really have many requests coming directly from users. We are dealing with data that has already been sanitized.
Там поиск информации,
But I
допустим,
understand that you're doing OSINT.
файл,
Now imagine that your model finds a PDF file.
это prompt
It analyzes the PDF file, and this PDF file contains a prompt injection. Yes, that is possible. That's why asking the LM itself if it contains any dubious instructions, that actually works. There is a solution, another solution to that, but I invite you to instead listen to the other report.
Добрый вечер. Большое
Good
спасибо.
evening.
Левая часть это где?
Левая
Да.
часть.
О, здравствуйте,
Зала.
левая часть.
And where are you?
Вечер добрый.
Good.
Большое спасибо за доклад. Очень такой технарский, интересный.
Thank you very much for such a technical, interesting presentation.
Про тестирование. Вот у вас промпты и
I
обертки,
understand
которые над ними
that you have your prompts and you have your code wrapping on top of them. Naturally, both change pretty often. So do you use any automated testing system? And if so, which one, and does it work?
У нас есть свой датасет, у нас вот есть
We've got our own data set.
есть вот наши меняющиеся промпты, у
So
нас
we've got our ever-changing prompts, and we've got reference results that we like.
которые
So with the help of another LLM,
прогоняем эти
which is
тесты,
in fact OpenAI, we test it all the time.
качество, которое поменялось.
So whenever we change prompts, we test it again. We've tried different frameworks. We've tried Llama Index, we've tried various RAG systems.
Потому что у тебя есть исход,
But all in all,
промпты
you
закидываешь,
have, an initial data set and the new prompts, and then you validate it with another LM and a simple Python script.
векторизации
Have you tried
результата и
vectorization of expected
Я про
results?
него слышал, но его не пробовали, к сожалению. Если
I've heard about that, but we have not really tried that. So if you have a good experience with that,
если
I would love to learn more.
да, здорово.
Yeah, how about I talk to you later? Yes, thank you very much.
Здравствуйте.
Здравствуйте.
Спасибо за доклад. Меня зовут Константин.
Hello, I'm Konstantin.
Следующий характер. Вы рассказывали о том, что у вас была задача о сборе информации
You've told us that you wanted to find more information about yourself on the internet.
на сайт, которым
Now, imagine that you find a website
либо же
which is protected against bots or a website running Java.
Воюем, потому что есть готовые API,
We're not fighting that
представляют. Мы пытались
because there are APIs for that.
обходящие там
We've tried
Cloudflare,
developing our own crawlers that can bypass captchas and Cloudflare.
тот же самый зарубежный ресурс, к сожалению,
We've been using APIs and some, Scripting Bee would be a good international service for that.
там есть тех,
And they're good for dealing with JavaScript sites. So, for example, there is a technique where you just wait for the content to load and then you work with the text.
это делать, это придется отдельную команду.
In order to do it for
все это обрабатывать.
ourselves on our own, I would need to hire lots of people. I don't want to do that. I want to do AI instead.
Это тоже часть ИИ.
Ну, я согласен, да.
It's part of AI.
Это своя сфера, то есть
Yes,
там тоже
yes.
есть где развернуться, но пока...
But that's a different priority for us. We are currently focusing on incident analysis.
Такими историями, когда защищаемся от парсинга сайтов.
А можете еще рассказать что-то про реальные кейсы?
Can you please tell us something about real
Реальные
cases?
кейсы про обработку.
Because what you've been telling us is more like hello world.
Ну, смотрите, мы обрабатываем
Is that about
инциденты,
incident
например,
processing?
информации. Раньше как
Well,
это обрабатывалось?
Take, for example, data leak
Например,
incidents.
аналитик
Previously,
раньше вручную скачивал какую-то
an analyst
детектировал какую-то
would
историю, такой смотрит,
detect
думает,
a
ну,
data
какие
leak,
тут данные есть, что можно использовать.
would
сколько там
consider
данных.
what
Сейчас всё это
kind of
просто
data is there,
обрабатывается
how it can be
Сейчас у
used.
нас есть, извините, что я вот этот технический момент обошел стороной, думал то, что...
I'm sorry for skipping this technical bit. I was concerned we wouldn't have enough time.
Агенты сами могут скачивать сэмплы.
So our agents can download samples, can identify the structure of the samples, identify what's data inside, what kind of data leaks are there, and then we can index it all and see if there are logins and passwords there, if there is a lot of sensitive data or not. Previously, you will use parsers for that on Java and what have you. And now we can easily use agents to do that. And we actually save a lot of time doing that.
Например, у нас поступает какой-то инцидент.
The same is true for incident processing. Now imagine that we're getting an incident. We will analyze it, we'll give it a rating on the basis of the LLM. Naturally, we have some rules, we have some, say, assessments. And all this is, in fact, shown in the prompt. So we say, well, we have this incident, we have such a rating. Tell us if it is really important, if it is relevant for such and such company.
Спасибо большое еще раз за доклад.
Да,
Thank you very much.
вам за вопрос.
Thank you.
К вопросу с второй стороны.
Да, здравствуйте, очень интересный доклад. А расскажите,
Thank
пожалуйста,
you.
вот вы уже рассказали, что у вас есть какие-то...
You've already told us that you have metrics and some data sets, and it means that you're already testing your models.
Онлайн меняют, shadow...
Sometimes
То есть, понятно, вы переоцениваете...
vendors do this shadow model replacement. I understand that you do some reassessment of your models.
разговаривать на
Now,
большие
what if
темы,
models,
какие-то цензоры у них срабатывают или такие вещи?
invoke their internal sensors?
Вы получаете какие-то на,
Does it ever happen
наверное, X результаты, но через там месяц модель...
that, you have some results, but then, a month later, the model starts drifting?
Не то, что модель прямо отказывается.
It does happen. We don't really have it so that, models refuse to work. But, models can start assessing the same indicators differently.
В том числе в соединениях и так далее, она приводит к тому,
This instability around connections and other things is leading us towards developing our own models. I'm a big fan of local models.
из Яндекса, из Сбера,
I mean,
крутые молодцы.
people from Yandex and Sber are doing a great thing. Please don't get me wrong, but I want to have my own system, right?
На таких
So our plan is to involve or deploy such models.
Для других людей, как выбирать...
What would be your recommendations for other people about choosing the right kind of model?
Где-то она
So
выступает...
a model will do some analysis and it will be, say, an editor and so on. What are the criteria is?
Принятые стандартных
We
лидеров
use
в индустрии,
these standards criteria.
Американские
It would be stupid to ignore American models, right?
Пишем прототипы на
We
OpenAI.
develop our prototypes on the basis of OpenAI, and they work
И потом начинаешь постепенно,
very well.
как говорится,
And then
переносить на меньшие модели, локальные модели, модели с квантизацией, с маленьким количеством
we sort of transpose them to smaller models, when we see that, performance goes down, we redo it. We have a hypothesis about what it is that we lost. The 4.5 is not available over API yet. We are testing it.
Снижать требования.
Да, спасибо.
Такой подход. Спасибо вам.
So we are kind of minimizing some American models, among other things.
Доклад заставляет задуматься
It's an interesting presentation.
автоматизации многих процессов.
It makes us think about automating so many processes. Thank you.
Практики примеры, когда какая-нибудь
Can you
международная
please tell us if there have been any cases in your experience where, say, an international company, geographically distributed, would respond to an incident that involved lots and lots of branches? How would an agentic system like the one you've described operate given the diversity of languages and applicable legislations? Will there be a lot of hallucination?
Уже говорил, один из основных тезисов при разработке.
Like I said, one of the key ideas in agent work is specificity. I don't think you can actually develop a single agent that will be great for the whole company in all the languages. You need an agent with a clear-cut task. An agent is just a break in the wall. An agent processes information in one language, another agent in another language. Moreover, it will need to serve a very specific, narrow purpose. Its mandate has to be limited. So if you have a huge global organization and you need to process incidents in different languages, you simply cannot do with a single agent.
Ситуация в том, что инциденты, которые мы обрабатываем, они достаточно узкоспецифичны.
The incidents that we are processing are pretty specific and narrow.
Что-то произошло. Это инцидент.
They're not just incidents of the kind something happened. No?
Регистрация фишингового домена и так далее.